when a woman's ex-husband took everything in a brutal divorce. He thought he'd left her with nothing. He forgot about the old tractor shed, a forgotten parcel of land her father had hidden in her name years ago. What she found inside would not only change her future, but rewrite her entire past. If you've ever felt like you've lost everything, or if you've ever had to start over from nothing, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and stick with me, because we're going to talk about what it means to find strength in the places no one else thought to look. The end arrived in a manila envelope. It was thick, heavy with the kind of paper that costs a law firm a fortune and costs a person their life. I was sitting at the wobbly kitchen table in my new apartment, a place so small you could boil water on the stove while still sitting on the couch. The air smelled of stale coffee and the paint on the walls, a landlord special beige that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. For 2 months, this box had been my world. 2 months since the final gavel, the sterile handshake with my own lawyer, the last time I saw Mark's face contort into something that looked almost like pity. Pity was worse than the anger. It made me feel small, breakable. I ran my thumb over the embossed return address of his legal team. Prescott, Finch, and Gable. It sounded like a company that sold expensive leather-bound books, not one that systematically dismantled a person's life with surgical precision. Inside, I knew, was the final decree. The last nail. The official document stating that the life I had built for 10 years was no longer mine. The house was his. The savings were his. The car was his. Even the dog, a golden retriever named Gus we'd picked out together, was his. His lawyer had argued, successfully, that I was an unstable environment for a pet. I think that was the part that broke me the most. My hands were trembling, but I slit the envelope open with a butter knife. The paper slid out, crisp and cold. I scanned the jargon, the legalese that had become a second, unwelcome language. Dissolution of marriage, disposition of assets, final and binding. Then, tucked at the very back, was a smaller, flimsy-looking document. A single sheet, stapled to a carbon copy of a property tax bill from a county I hadn't lived in for a decade. My name was on it. Alara Vance. Well, Alara Connolly now, I suppose. I hadn't even had the energy to fight to get my own name back. The bill was for $112 for a parcel of land in Northwood County. Parcel 7B, Block 4, Lot 12. It was listed as 1.5 acres of undeveloped rural land. Under structures, it simply said 1. Agricultural. I stared at it, a deep furrow forming between my brows. I didn't own any land. My family's farm, the place I grew up, had been sold off piece by piece years ago to pay my father's medical bills and the debts he'd accrued trying to keep it afloat. My father was gone now, 5 years gone. He'd lost the farm, then he'd lost his fight. There was nothing left. I picked up my phone, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy as I dialed my lawyer, Ms. Albright. She was a woman who spoke in short, efficient sentences and wore blazers that were sharper than her legal arguments. She answered on the second ring. Ms. Connolly. It's Alara, I said, my voice hoarse. I just got the final papers. I told you they were on their way, she said. There was no sympathy in her voice, just fact. It was one of the things I appreciated about her. She didn't deal in false comfort. Is there a problem? Maybe. I don't know. There's a property tax bill in here. For a piece of land in Northwood County. I heard the rustle of papers on her end. A soft click of her keyboard. That's not possible, she said after a moment. We did a full asset search on both of you. Mark's team was thorough. They wouldn't have missed a parcel of land. Well, they did, I said, reading the parcel number aloud. It says it's 1.5 acres, with a barn or something on it. There was a longer silence this time. I could picture her leaning forward, her glasses perched on her nose, staring at her monitor with an intensity that could probably set fire to it. Oh, she said, and the single word was laced with a new, unfamiliar tone. It sounded like interest. Well, I'll be. It's here. Title was transferred to one Alara Vance on her 18th birthday. A quitclaim deed. From your father, Robert Vance. It was never filed with the state's central registry, just the county clerk's office. It's an old filing. Pre-digital, for the most part. They must have been looking for digital assets, LLCs, major holdings. They wouldn't have thought to pull the dusty old deed books for a forgotten sliver of farmland. My heart started a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. My father? But the farm was sold. Not all of it, apparently, Ms. Albright said. This parcel, 7B, it looks like it was sectioned off from the main property years before the final foreclosure. According to this, he filed the deed for you and just kept paying the taxes on it. Quietly. $100 a year. It's legally, indisputably yours. It was yours before you were married, a direct inheritance gift. Mark can't touch it. It's not a marital asset. It's a ghost on the books. It's nothing, but it's yours. Nothing. She was right. 1.5 acres of overgrown weeds and a dilapidated building in a town I'd run away from. It was worthless. A liability, probably. Another bill I couldn't afford to pay. But it was also the first thing in 2 years that had my name on it, and only my name. A ghost. A whisper from my father across 5 years of silence. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I didn't see the cold, sterile courtroom. I saw a field of Queen Anne's lace, a sagging barn roof, and the heavy, humid air of a summer afternoon in Northwood County. I saw home, or what was left of it. The drive north was a journey back in time. With every mile I put between me and the city, the concrete towers and screeching traffic bled away, replaced by rolling hills and wide, unforgiving skies. My car, a sputtering 20-year-old sedan I'd bought for $600 in cash, whined in protest as it climbed the inclines. The driver's side window didn't roll down all the way, and the air conditioning had given up last summer, so a ribbon of hot, dusty wind whipped through the car, carrying the scent of cut grass and distant rain. It was the smell of my childhood. I hadn't been back since the funeral. After Dad died, Mom sold the last of what was left of the house and moved to Florida to live with her sister. She said the memories were too loud. I understood. At the time, I was busy building my new life with Mark, a life of dinner parties and weekend trips and conversations about stock portfolios I never really understood. I didn't want the loud memories either. I wanted the quiet, carpeted future he promised me. It's funny how the quietest places can end up screaming the loudest. Northwood hadn't changed. The same faded signs advertised the annual county fair. The same water tower, a pale blue giant, stood guard over the town. I passed the diner where I'd had my first cup of coffee, the small movie theater with its peeling paint, the high school where I'd first met Mark. He'd been the town's golden boy, the son of a successful property developer. I was the quiet farmer's daughter. It felt like a storybook cliché. I just never thought I'd be the one with the unhappy ending. Following the GPS on my phone, which kept losing its signal, I turned off the main road and onto a gravel path I vaguely remembered. The road was more of a suggestion now, 2 ruts carved into the earth, overgrown with weeds that scraped against the undercarriage of my car. Trees crowded in on either side, their branches knitting together overhead, plunging the lane into a cool, green twilight. After about a quarter of a mile, the lane opened into a small, sun-drenched clearing. And there it was, the barn, or what was left of it. Ms. Albright had called it an agricultural structure, which was a generous term. It was a tractor shed, a big one, made of wood that had long ago surrendered its coat of red paint to the sun and the rain, leaving it a soft, splintery silver gray. The roof sagged in the middle like the back of an old horse. One of the huge, sliding doors had fallen off its runner and leaned against the frame at a drunken angle. The land around it was a riot of wildflowers and thorny bushes, a testament to years of neglect. It was beautiful, and it was heartbreaking. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind in the tall grass. For a long time, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. This was it. My inheritance. My kingdom of weeds. $112 a year for this. It was absurd. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Mark was probably sitting in our polished chrome kitchen, drinking a $500 bottle of wine, and I was here, the proud owner of a derelict shed. I got out of the car. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. I pushed my way through the tall grass, the seed heads catching on my jeans. The fallen door had left the gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. As I approached, a fat barn swallow swooped out from the dark interior, chittering in annoyance at the intrusion. I ducked my head and slipped inside. The air in the barn was 10 degrees cooler and smelled of rust, oil, and ancient dust. Sunlight streamed in through gaps in the siding, cutting bright, hazy shafts through the gloom. Motes of dust danced in the light like tiny, frantic ghosts. It was bigger than I remembered. My father used to park the big green John Deere tractor in here, along with the hay baler and the disc harrow. Now it was mostly empty. In the center of the hard-packed dirt floor sat a single object, an old, rusted-out tractor, a Farmel from the 50s, its tires long since rotted away, leaving it resting on its steel rims. It looked like the fossilized remains of some great, prehistoric beast. Along the walls were remnants of a life. Rusted tools hung from pegs, their wooden handles smooth and dark from my father's hands. A stack of cracked tires leaned in one corner. An old metal oil drum stood in another, a cobweb strung from its rim to a rafter overhead. I ran my hand along a workbench, my fingers coming away coated in a thick layer of grime. Beneath the dust, I could see the scars in the wood, nicks and grooves left by slip saws and stray hammer blows. Each mark was a memory. Each one was a story I had tried so hard to forget. I walked the perimeter of the vast, cavernous space, my footsteps echoing in the silence. It felt sacred, like a church dedicated to forgotten things. My father had kept this. For me, he had sliced this tiny piece from his dying dream and tucked it away, a secret held for more than a decade. Why? A gift for my 18th birthday? It didn't make sense. He was a practical man. He wouldn't have given me a useless, crumbling building and a field of weeds as a present. There had to be more to it. My eyes scanned the floor. It was mostly packed earth, but in the far corner, tucked away behind the skeletal remains of the Farmel, I saw a section of wooden planking. It was darker than the surrounding dirt, slightly raised, about 4 feet square. It looked out of place. My heart gave a little skip. It was the kind of thing you see in movies. The loose floorboard, the hidden treasure. It was ridiculous. This was real life. But still, I walked over to it, my boots crunching softly on the dirt. I knelt down, the dampness of the ground seeping into the knees of my jeans. I wedged my fingers into a crack between 2 of the boards and pulled. It didn't budge. Of course not. It was just a patch in the floor, probably covering an old engine pit or something. I was letting my imagination run away with me, desperate for a miracle. I sat back on my heels, ready to give up, to just go back to my car and drive away from this sad, lonely place. But then I saw it. A small, dark hole drilled into the corner of one of the boards, almost completely obscured by dirt. It was just big enough to stick a finger in. It was a handle. It's strange how hope works. It's not a floodlight. It's a flicker. A tiny, fragile spark in a vast darkness. Finding that little hole in the floorboard was a spark. My breath caught in my throat. I cleared away the dirt with the side of my hand and hooked my index finger into the hole. I pulled, bracing myself with my other hand on the ground. The wood groaned in protest, the sound loud in the dead quiet of the barn. It was heavy. I gritted my teeth, put my whole body into it, and pulled again. With a sucking sound, the board lifted. Then the next one. It wasn't a section of flooring. It was a lid. A heavy, plankwood lid set into the earth. Beneath it was a dark, square hole, about 3 feet deep. The air that rose from it was cool and smelled of cellar damp and something else, something metallic. And nestled in the bottom, resting on a bed of dry straw, was a metal box. It was an old army surplus ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. It wasn't a treasure chest covered in gold and jewels. It was something better. It was something real. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear or grief. It was anticipation. I reached down into the hole, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. It was heavy. I hooked my hands underneath it and lifted, my muscles straining. I sat on the dirt floor beside the hole with a solid, satisfying thud. The latch was stiff with rust, but I worked it back and forth until with a loud creak it sprang open. I took a deep breath, held it, and lifted the lid. For a moment, I just stared. I think I was expecting, I don't know what I was expecting. Gold bars, piles of cash, something dramatic. The reality was far more mundane and far more terrifying. The box was full of paper. On the very top was a thick, yellowed envelope with a single word written on it in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting, Ilera. Have you ever had a moment where you felt the whole world shift under your feet? Where everything you thought you knew was about to be turned upside down? That's where I was, kneeling on the damp earth of a forgotten barn, holding a letter from a dead man. If you're finding a piece of yourself in this story, if you've ever had to dig through the past to find your future, I want you to let me know in the comments. We're a community here of people who get it. Your story matters. And I promise you, I read every single one. Now, let's get back to that box. My fingers felt numb as I picked up the envelope. The paper was soft with age. I could feel the folded sheets inside, thick and substantial. This wasn't a birthday card. This was a reckoning. I took another shaky breath and broke the seal. The letter was dated a week after my 18th birthday, the same week he had signed this land over to me. I unfolded the pages. There were at least 10 of them, front and back, all covered in his cramped, left-leaning script. My dearest Ilera, it began. If you are reading this, it means a few things have happened. First, it means I am gone. I hope it was peaceful. Second, it means you have found this place, this last piece of our home. And third, it means you're in trouble. I am so sorry for that. I pray I'm wrong about that last part. I pray you found this box on a whim, that you are happy and safe, and that the contents of this box will mean nothing to you but the ramblings of your old man. But I have a feeling I'm not wrong. I had to stop and close my eyes. His voice. I could hear it as I read the words, calm and steady, the way he always was, even when the world was falling down around him. I could see his hands, calloused and stained with engine grease, holding the pen. A single tear escaped and traced a cold path down my cheek. I wiped it away impatiently and kept reading. I have to tell you a story, Ilera. The real story of what happened to the farm. I know you think I lost it to bad luck and bad decisions, and you're partly right. I was never as good a businessman as I was a farmer. But that's not the whole truth. We didn't just have bad luck. We had help. We were pushed. The next few pages laid it all out in excruciating, heartbreaking detail. He wrote about the bad harvest, the loan from the bank he couldn't repay. And then he wrote about the offer of help from a local investor, a man who was buying up land all over the county. A man who offered my father a private loan to cover his debt with the bank, using the farm as collateral. A man named Thomas Markson, Mark's father. My blood ran cold. I kept reading, my eyes flying across the page. Dad had taken the loan. He'd been desperate. Mr. Markson had been so friendly, so understanding. A pillar of the community. He'd structured the loan with a balloon payment at the end, something he assured my father would be easy to refinance when the time came. But when the time came, the terms had changed. The interest rate was suddenly triple what they discussed. The fine print my father wrote was a spider's web. He was trapped. He couldn't pay, and he couldn't refinance. Thomas Markson foreclosed, taking the entire farm for pennies on the dollar. Legally, cleanly. He was a predator, Ilera, my father wrote. He came to me like a friend, and he bled me dry. He knew I was on my knees, and he kicked me down. And then his son started dating my daughter. Can you imagine how that felt? To watch you, my greatest treasure, fall in love with the son of the man who destroyed me? I want to hate him. I tried. But you loved him, and he seemed to love you. I saw how you looked at him, how happy you were. So I buried it. I buried the anger and the hate because I wanted my daughter to be happy. What kind of father would I be if I took that away from you with my own bitterness? I was sobbing now, great, racking sobs that tore through my chest. The letter was trembling in my hands. All those years, I'd seen my father's quiet sadness as failure. I'd seen his resignation as weakness. I had been ashamed of him, ashamed of our poverty, of the way Mark's family had everything and we had nothing. And all that time, he had been carrying this, protecting me from a truth he thought would break my heart, protecting my love for a boy whose family had picked our bones clean. But that wasn't all. The letter was only the beginning. Beneath it, the box was filled with documents. neatly bundled and tied with twine. There was my father's original loan agreement from the bank, and beside it, the private loan from Thomas Markson, with its impossibly complex clauses and hidden fees. There were old ledgers, written in my father's hand, tracking his expenses, his profits, his desperate attempts to make ends meet. And then there were other files. My father, it turned out, had not been idle in his grief. After he lost the farm, he started digging, quietly, methodically. He had found other families, other farmers, small business owners, people who had been helped by Thomas Markson. He had collected their stories. In the box were copies of their loan agreements, foreclosure notices, letters they had written begging for mercy. It was a pattern, a predatory, systematic campaign to acquire land and assets from vulnerable people by indebting them beyond their means. It was all there. Dates, names, amounts. It was a decade of methodical ruin, all documented in my father's careful script. At the very bottom of the box was another envelope. This one was smaller. Inside was not a letter, but cash. Thick bundles of $100 bills, wrapped in rubber bands. I counted it. My hand shook so badly I had to start over 3 times. It was $50,000. The last page of my father's letter explained. I sold my truck, my tools, everything I had left of any value. I worked odd jobs under the table for years. I saved every penny I could. It's not much, but it's clean. It's yours. If you are reading this because your life has fallen apart, take this money and run. Disappear. Start over somewhere new, somewhere they can't find you. Forget all this. Forget the papers. Forget the Marksons. Just live. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you. But there is another choice. The papers in this box, they are proof. They are a weapon. It's probably not enough to put a man like Thomas Markson in jail. Men like that don't go to jail. But it's enough to ruin him, to expose him for what he is. It would be a fight. It would be ugly. And I don't know if you could win. They are powerful people, Ilera, and they will not hesitate to crush you. So that is the choice I leave you. A new life or a war. I don't know which is right. I just know I had to give you the option. This land, this barn, it's not much of a kingdom, but it is a place to stand, a place to decide. Whatever you choose, know that your father loved you more than the world. Know that I am proud of you. Always. I let the letter fall into my lap. The silence of the barn pressed in on me. The air was thick with the weight of it all. $50,000. I could walk away. I could pay off the debts Mark had saddled me with. I could get a new apartment, a better car. I could move to the coast. I could be a different person. Free. The thought was a siren's song, a sweet, seductive promise of peace. All I had to do was close the lid on this box, bury it back in the earth, and walk away. No one would ever know. But I also saw my father's face, the deep lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the way his shoulders stooped in the last few years of his life. I saw the ghosts of the other families in those papers, their lives dismantled just like ours. I saw Mark's smug, pitying face in the courtroom, and I saw Thomas Markson shaking my hand at our wedding, his smile never quite reaching his eyes, calling me his new daughter. A hot, bitter rage rose in my throat, choking me. It was a rage I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I had swallowed it, suppressed it, let it curdle in his sadness and shame. But now it was burning clean. He had called this place a kingdom of weeds and dust and broken things. But he was wrong. It wasn't a kingdom. It was an armory. And my father had just handed me all the weapons I would ever need. The choice was mine, run or fight. For the first time since the divorce began, I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel broken. I felt the weight of my father's love, his sacrifice, his quiet, stubborn resilience. He had lost his war, but he had left me a map to win mine. Kneeling there on the cold, damp earth, with the dust motes dancing in the slanted light, I felt the last 2 years of fear and helplessness begin to slough off me like a dead skin. I knew what I had to do. The next 48 hours were a blur of motion and purpose, a stark contrast to the stagnant grief I'd been living in for months. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I drove. First, I went to the nearest town with a 24-hour copy shop. The kid working the graveyard shift, a teenager with tired eyes and headphones around his neck, looked at me strangely as I fed page after page of my father's meticulous records into the machine. I made 3 complete sets. One for me, one for Ms. Albright, and one to be stored somewhere safe, somewhere the Marksons could never touch. The smell of toner and hot paper filled my car, a strangely modern scent to mix with the barn's ancient dust. Then I found a motel. It was a sad little place off the highway, with a flickering neon sign and bedspreads that had seen better decades. I spread the original documents out on the floor, organizing them, reading them again and again until the legal jargon started to make a sick kind of sense. I wasn't just looking at papers anymore. I was looking at lives. I saw the Henderson family, who lost their dairy farm. The Garcias, who lost their small trucking company. The Millers, whose family had owned the local hardware store for 3 generations. All of them ensnared in the same web of predatory loans, all of them helped by Thomas Markson. My father had even included small, handwritten notes on some of them, details he must have gleaned from quiet conversations over coffee or beer. Jim Henderson had a heart attack a year after the foreclosure. His wife, Mary, works as a cleaner at the high school now. Carlos Garcia had to declare bankruptcy. His son dropped out of college. Each note was a testament to the human cost, the quiet devastation that followed in the wake of Markson's ambition. I put the $50,000 in the motel safe, all except for a few $100s I tucked into my wallet. It felt like blood money. My father's life, distilled into a stack of paper. I couldn't use it to run. It had to be used for the fight. It was my war chest. Finally, I called Ms. Albright. It was a Saturday morning, but I knew she worked weekends. She picked up with her usual briskness. "Alara, I was wondering when you'd call. Did you find anything interesting in that shed?" I took a deep breath. "You have no idea." I told her everything. I started with my father's letter, my voice cracking as I read passages of it aloud to her. I told her about the ledgers, the loan agreements from the other families, the sheer, methodical cruelty of it all. I told her about the money. For once, she was silent on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, the faint click of a pen against her desk. She just listened. When I was finished, the story hanging in the air between us, there was a long pause. "Alara," she said, and her voice was different, softer. "Your father was a remarkable man." "Yes," I said, the word catching in my throat. "He was." "What do you want to do?" she asked. It wasn't a legal question. It was a human one. "I want to fight," I said, and the words felt solid, real. "I don't want his money. I don't want revenge. Not really. I want to make it stop. I want to use what my father gave me to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." "Good," she said, and the brisk, professional tone was back, but now it was underpinned with something new. "A fire. That's a good answer. This changes things. This isn't a divorce settlement anymore. What you have, this documentation, it's leverage. A civil suit for fraud would be difficult and expensive, but the threat of it, the public exposure. Thomas Markson has a reputation to protect. He's a community leader, a philanthropist." She practically spat the word. "The last thing he wants is for his business practices to be laid bare in the court of public opinion, especially not with a binder full of evidence to back it up." We talked for another hour, mapping out a strategy. It wasn't about suing for the old farm back. That was gone. It was about creating a new kind of justice. We would approach Markson's lawyers, not with a lawsuit, but with an offer. A private, binding settlement. My silence in exchange for restitution. Not just for me, but for the other families my father had documented. It was a long shot. It was audacious. It was terrifying. "They will threaten you," Alara, Ms. Albright warned. "They will try to intimidate you. They will dig into your life and use anything they can find against you. You have to be ready for that." "I've already lost everything," I said, looking around the grimy motel room. "What else can they possibly take from me?" The drive back to the city was different. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I was driving toward a future, a battle I had chosen. The world outside my window looked sharper, the colors more vivid. I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The grief for my father was still there, a heavy ache in my chest, but now it was mingled with a fierce, protective pride. He had armed me. It was my job to see it through. I met Ms. Albright at her office on Monday morning. I walked in carrying the box of original documents. I placed it on her vast mahogany desk with a thud that echoed in the quiet room. She looked at the box, then at me. A slow, thin smile spread across her face. "Let's get to work," she said. The first letter from Prescott, Finch, and Gable arrived a week later. It was dismissive, arrogant. It called my claims baseless and defamatory, and threatened a countersuit for harassment. It was exactly what Ms. Albright had predicted. They were trying to scare me off. I read it, folded it neatly, and slid it into a file. The fear I expected to feel wasn't there. There was just a cold, calm resolve. We sent our reply. It was simple. A single page, attached to which were photocopies of 3 documents: my father's loan agreement with Thomas Markson, Jim Henderson's loan agreement, and Carlos Garcia's. We included my father's handwritten notes about the consequences. We didn't make any threats. We didn't have to. The evidence spoke for itself. We ended the letter with a simple sentence: "We have documentation for 12 other families. We await your proposal for a resolution." The phone call came 2 days later. It was Mark. I hadn't spoken to him since the final court date. His voice was strained, unfamiliar. "Alara, what are you doing?" "I know what your father did, Mark," I said. My voice was even, devoid of the emotion that was churning in my stomach. "My father helped your family," he sputtered. "He tried to save your farm." "No," I said. "He destroyed it. And then he did the same thing to a dozen other families. I have the proof." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear him breathing heavily. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice low. "I want you to tell your father to look at the settlement offer my lawyer sent over. And I want you to think very carefully about what happens if he says no." I hung up the phone before he could reply. My hand was shaking so hard I had to set the receiver down on the table. But I had done it. I had faced him, not as his broken ex-wife, but as Robert Vance's daughter. The next few weeks were a tense, drawn-out negotiation. Their lawyers postured and threatened. We held firm. We didn't ask for the moon. We drafted a settlement that was fair but punitive. First, they would pay off the entirety of the debt they had manufactured to saddle me with in the divorce. Second, they would establish a restitution fund, administered by a neutral third party, to compensate the families my father had identified. The amounts weren't life-changing, but for people like Mary Henderson or the Garcia family, it would be enough to clear their debts, to give them a fresh start. It was a way to restore not just their money, but their dignity. The final condition was mine, and it was non-negotiable. The 1.5 acres, Parcel 7B, was to be legally buffered. They were to sign a binding covenant, placing a permanent conservation easement on the 20 acres of land surrounding my property, which Markson's development company now owned. They could never build on it. They could never touch it. My father's last piece of home would remain quiet. It would remain wild. It would remain ours. Their lawyers balked at that last part. It was financially insignificant, but it was a matter of pride. It was a permanent monument to their defeat. But Ms. Albright was relentless. She made it clear that without the easement, the deal was off, and we would hold a press conference. We would release the documents. We would tell the story. In the end, they folded. The day I signed the final settlement agreement was gray and overcast, the sky the color of slate. I sat in Ms. Albright's office, the same room where I had cried over my divorce papers just a month earlier. But this time I felt no tears. I signed my name, my hand steady, my signature clear and strong. It was over. Ms. Albright slid a check across the table to me. It wasn't for a huge amount, just enough to cover her legal fees and give me a small cushion to live on for a year. The real money, the bulk of the settlement, was going into the restitution fund. "You did a good thing, Alara," she said, her voice quiet. "A hard thing. Your father would be very proud." I nodded, unable to speak. I took the check, folded it, and put it in my pocket. I stood up and shook her hand. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "The pleasure was all mine," she said, and I could tell that for once. It wasn't just a professional courtesy. I didn't go back to my tiny apartment. I got in my car and I started driving north. I didn't stop until the gravel was crunching under my tires and the old, silver-gray barn was standing in front of me. I got out and walked inside. The air was still and cool. The shafts of light still cut through the gloom, illuminating the dancing dust. I walked over to the spot where I had found the box, and I sat down on the hard-packed earth. It was quiet. The crickets were chirping outside. A breeze rustled the leaves. I closed my eyes and I thought about my father. I thought about his quiet strength, his hidden pain, his fierce, unending love. He hadn't left me money, not really. He hadn't left me a piece of land. He had left me a choice. He had left me a story, and he had trusted me to know what to do with it. I cried then, not with the racking sobs of grief and anger I had felt before, but with quiet, grateful tears. I cried for the man he was. I cried for the years I had misunderstood him, and I cried for the second chance he had given me, a chance to rebuild not just my life, but his legacy. The work was slow. It was hard. The $50,000 my father had left me became the seed money for the project. I hired a local crew to replace the roof of the barn, their hammers echoing across the clearing from dawn till dusk. I learned how to sand wood, how to pour concrete, how to wire an electrical outlet without shocking myself. Most days I was covered in sawdust and paint, my muscles aching in ways I never knew they could. It was the most satisfying exhaustion I had ever felt. I sold my car and bought an old, beat-up pickup truck. I spent my days hauling lumber and my evenings sitting on the steps of the barn, watching the fireflies rise from the tall grass as the sun went down. The town began to notice. People I hadn't seen in years would stop by. Old neighbors, friend of my father. At first, they were just curious. Then, they started to help. Mr. Henderson, Jim's brother, showed up one Saturday with a tractor and a brush hog and cleared the entire field for me in an afternoon. He wouldn't take any money for it. "Your dad was a good man," was all he said. Mary Henderson started dropping off casseroles twice a week. The Garcia boys, now grown men, came by on weekends to help me frame out the interior walls. Slowly, painfully, the barn began to transform. It wasn't going to be a house. It was going to be something else. A workshop, a community space, a place where people could come to learn, to build, to fix things that were broken. I used the settlement money to buy tools, welding equipment, a table saw, a wood lathe. I wanted to create a place that honored my father's memory, a place for people who, like him, worked with their hands, a place for people who had been pushed down to learn how to build themselves back up. One evening, as I was packing up for the day, a sleek, black sedan pulled up the gravel lane. My heart seized for a moment. It was Mark. He got out of the car, looking awkward and out of place in his expensive suit against the rustic backdrop of the barn. He looked older, tired. "Alara," he said. "Mark," I didn't move toward him. I just stood my ground, a wrench still in my hand. "The place looks different," he said, gesturing vaguely at the new roof, the stacks of fresh lumber. "It is," I said. He shuffled his feet. I read your father's letter." I stared at him. "How?" "My father's lawyers got a copy during the discovery for the settlement. He showed it to me. He wanted me to see what you were capable of." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "I think he wanted me to hate you for it, for what you cost us." "And do you?" I asked, my voice quiet. He shook his head, looking down at his polished shoes, now covered in a fine layer of dust. "No, I never knew about what my dad did to yours. I swear, Alara, I was just a kid. I didn't understand the business side of things." "You're not a kid anymore, Mark," I said. "I know." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't pity or anger. It was shame. "What you did, giving the money back to those families. You didn't have to do that." "Yes," I said. "I did." He nodded slowly. "I know. That's the difference between you and me, between your family and mine." He stood there for a long moment, as if he wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he just turned and got back in his car. I watched him drive away, the dust from his tires hanging in the still evening air, until he was gone. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt quiet. It was finally, truly over. It's been a year now. The barn is finished. We call it the Vance Project. It's a non-profit now, a community workshop. We hold classes on carpentry, mechanics, welding. We have a tool lending library for people who can't afford their own. Mary Henderson runs a program for teenagers, teaching them how to repair small engines. Carlos Garcia's son, the one who had to drop out of college, is our head instructor. He found he had a gift for teaching. Sometimes when the place is empty at the end of the day, I walk through the vast, open space. The air smells of sawdust and welding flux, of creation and repair. The old, rusted farmal tractor still sits in the center of the room. I never moved it. It's our centerpiece, a reminder of where all this came from. A monument to a quiet man who loved his daughter enough to give her a war and trusted her enough to let her choose peace. I've learned that inheritance isn't always about what you're given. It's about what you do with it. Home isn't a building. It's a foundation. And sometimes the most broken places have the strongest bones. My father gave me a crumbling shed and a box of secrets. He thought he was leaving me a choice between running and fighting. But he was wrong. He was leaving me a third option, the chance to build. This story, my story, is about finding out that the end is never really the end. It's just an opportunity to begin again, but this time with the wisdom of what's been broken. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. It means the world to me. I started this channel to share stories like this, stories about resilience, about second chances, about finding strength in the ruins. If that's something you need in your life, I hope you'll subscribe and become a part of our community. I want to ask you to do one more thing. In the comments below, I want you to tell me about a time you had to build something new out of something that was broken. It doesn't have to be a barn. It could be a relationship, a career, a life. Your stories matter. They're a testament to the fact that we are all builders, all survivors. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.